Welcome, everyone. I am super excited to talk to Tiina Hoffman today. Tiina is an exercise physiologist and master trainer at First Beat Technologies. And First Beat is a leading company in physiological analytics and wearable technology. Tina's got a bit of a background in exercise physiology and elite performance science, and she's been a key part of the First Beat team and has developed an evidence-based approach which is used in sort of corporate wellness and in consumer wearables also, and also in professional sport. But her work tends to bridge the gap between the hard science and practical recovery tools and looking at stress cycles. So I love this area. I find it utterly fascinating. I wear various wearables. So we're going to touch on aspects of this in terms of how people can use wearables to help to optimize themselves and think about how they can reduce stress or eliminate the risk of burnout and help to optimize themselves. So Tiina, thank you very much for joining me from Finland. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Simon, for the introduction. And it's really nice to be here as your guest.
Thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, if that's okay?
Yeah, so today I worked almost 17 years at First Beat as an exercise physiologist and master trainer. So I train our international partners in the use of First Beat methodology, and I do a lot of lectures in the corporate wellness space and also different kind of webinars and lectures for our professional users as well. Prior to my time at First Beat, I sort of, when I go decades back when I was young, I was a Nordic ski racer,
Okay,
and
cool.
I ended up moving
Downhill?
from, pardon,
Downhill?
not downhill, Nordic,
Okay, not okay, cross
the,
country,
the,
sorry.
the
Yep.
cross country, yeah. So I moved when I was 18. I moved to Alaska. I raced collegiate in the collegiate circuit there for 4 years, and ended up living in Alaska for 11 years, and I worked as a
Wow.
Nordic ski coach at the university for 5 years. So I was in sports coaching quite intensively. But then when I moved back to Finland, I got my degree in exercise physiology, and sort of gradually over some years, I transitioned from focusing more on sort of overtraining of athletes into overload and overtraining in regular people. So I worked about
General.
10 years in I worked about 10 years in academic studies and in the academic field before then now I've been at First Beat for a long time.
Cool. That's a fascinating background. So, Tiina, we're going to dive into a few questions about some of the metrics that Firstbit uses and also lots of wearables use, but maybe they need a frame of reference for people who are listening about what they actually mean. So we're going to talk about resting heart rate, but we're also going to talk about HRV, respiratory rate, and also sleep quality. So can you give us a little overview on how First Beat uses some of these metrics?
Yeah, so First Beat is we are sort of a pioneer in this area of heart rate variability analytics. We've been working over 20 years in this space, and nowadays it's a lot more common than it was 20 years ago. But basically, what we do is we start with very accurate heartbeat data. So we use a device that measures every heartbeat, whether it's on an athlete as a chest belt or in a regular person in a different kind of device. But it measures every heartbeat sort of in daily life all day and all night. And from that, heart rate variability means the variation in time between consecutive heartbeats, and it allows us to kind of get a window into the autonomic nervous system. So based on that heart rate variability data, we can start getting an idea of what kinds of situations the body is going through. And our algorithm, in addition to the heart rate variability data, we are able to estimate respiration rate quite accurately. We are able to estimate energy expenditure and oxygen uptake. We obviously look at heart rate throughout the measurement.
Yep.
And all that kind of goes into a blender, into the algorithm, and that then translates that metrics, those numbers, into what we call physiological states,
Yep.
such as a stress reaction or recovery reaction or exercise or sleep. And that's kind of That's what we do. We use that data to then come up with this kind of meaningful insights about what's going on in the body in daily life.
Okay, interesting. So just touching on HRV, because this might be a metric that people don't quite get, and I think you also mentioned oxygen uptake. So you're talking about or VO2 max in this particular instance, which is your maximum oxygen uptake per minute of oxygen. That's correct.
Yeah, milliliters per, yeah, that's the maximal performance capacity that a person has.
Okay, and heart rate variability. Now, lots of people assume that actually, you don't want your heart rate variability to be very high because you want, the regular heart rate. But actually, what you want is you want your body working in a nice, relaxed state so that between every heartbeat, there is a degree of variability. And the higher that variability is, generally, the more activated your parasympathetic nervous system would be. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. It is a bit counterintuitive because high heart rate variability is associated with low heart rate, but it's that millisecond level variation between
Yes.
heartbeats that means that heart is responsive and healthy and able to sort of react to different demands in our days. And we don't really feel it. It's not the same as your heart rate going up and down like it would, when you exercise versus when you
Yep.
rest.
Yep.
It's a more subtle level of variability, but it's definitely a characteristic of a healthy heart. And that's why we use that particular metric to really get an idea of how the body is reacting.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Because I sometimes explain it to clients or to patients that actually, when you're particularly stressed, your heart is beating very, very regularly in the same, because adrenaline and cortisol and some of these hormones will be driving that. And actually, that's not necessarily a good thing to have that for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah,
And what we want to try and do is to try and have that balance between the two systems,
yeah,
the balance between the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system, which form part of your autonomic nervous system.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And a person can even simply check it if you are sometimes feeling quite stressed and restless. You might put your finger on your wrist and just feel your heartbeat, and it's probably going boom, 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 very fast and very even. And that is a sign that it's not in a relaxed state, but it's in kind of a stress state.
Yep. Okay, cool. So you just touched on it a little bit there, but what makes First Beat's analysis and their algorithm unique compared to some of the other wearables? And because there's a huge number in the market now, lots of trackers are out there, and they're all doing more and more sort of analysis on people, which is interesting. But I often, it's the scores that you get if you put an Apple Watch on versus an Aura Ring versus a Whoop versus some of these other consumables, you'd get a different score in your recovery score or your restful state or whatever it is that they're measuring. So how is Firstbeat unique in how it uses this data for its algorithm?
Yeah, so the wellness product that we have, First Beat Life, I'll mainly talk about that, but we use a device that's actually attached on the body via electrodes, so we electrically detect every heartbeat. So it's
Yep.
sort of ECG level accuracy, whereas the wearable devices, they use so-called PPG or optical grade accuracy. So from the blood flow, they kind of estimate where your heartbeat is, and
Yes.
that means that the level of accuracy is significantly higher with the device that we use. It doesn't mean that the other devices aren't any good, of course, because if you are wearing it consistently, you can learn some really good trends from that. But we've sort of developed a professional tool. Our tool is used by professional health coaches and wellness coaches, fitness coaches, nutritionists with their clients. And so we want to give them data and a device that provides very accurate data both while the person is moving, like at work, during their leisure time, during their sleep, during exercise. So kind of a 24/7 view into the or 24-hour view into their life, and with confidence that it's accurate data. And maybe one other point about the difference is I mentioned that typically this is used by coaches. So I would say that that's one of the differentiating factors too, that this is not designed as a consumer wearable that a person would wear all the time. You've worn it, you know that
Yes,
nobody
exactly.
wants to
Two
live with a,
it's a two-lead ECG essentially, isn't it?
yeah, it's a two-lead ECG, and so nobody wants to live with it all the time. But we provide a really detailed and practical sort of portal for the coach, so that if you are my client and I'm the coach, and you've done a first beat measurement, you'll see your own measurements results in your app. But I, as a coach, I'm able to see it via the coaching portal, and so we can have a discussion even if you are sitting in the UK and I'm sitting in Finland, without having to send me screenshots of your device and me trying to
Yeah.
understand what that might mean. So we've developed this professional portal for coaches to, to be able to use this tool with their clients.
Yeah, because what I love about First Beat is the data and how they use the data and present the data. Um, but what it does do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it provides that nice snapshot over a period of 3 to 5 days, where that the user might be wearing it, compared to a wearable which you're wearing, you know, consistently because they're more comfortable, but it's giving you significantly more accurate data, because of how it's positioned on the body.
Yeah, accurate and detailed. So we'll a little bit later we'll take a look at a couple of examples of this kind of a 24-hour view, so that the listeners can also kind of get an idea of what we are talking about. But that's the kind of view from the real life that I think makes it interesting. And like you said, typically it's a 3 to 5 days snapshot, and then maybe repeated quarterly or once a month, or at the beginning and end of an intervention, or something like that. But not constantly, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So and maybe use slightly different language to to what we do, but often I talk to clients about this active stress and passive stress. Are you able to explain a little bit how this relates to first beats and how the sort of algorithm differentiates sometimes some good active stress that you might get from exercise and perhaps passive stress, which is perhaps more mental or emotional stimulation or yeah, how would you describe that?
Yeah, so if you're looking at the graph that's displayed, so there you can see these different colors there. So firstly, red and blue
Just to
colors.
let everyone know, we'll display this graph in a snapshot in a second. We
Yeah,
can't live share it.
yeah. So the blue and red color both mean some kind of stress. Blue means stress caused by some kind of physical activity, so either light exercise or some kind of actual exercise. And we can tell that because the heart rate is elevated and the oxygen uptake is elevated and respiration rate is elevated and there is movement. So there's many metrics that we can use to be able to definitely tell when the person is exercising. The
Yeah.
red means some kind of stress from like a mental source. So it means that your activation level is elevated. Typically, your heart rate is a bit higher and your heart rate variability is lower compared to your baseline from when
Uh,
you are resting. So the kind of mental and physical stress are kind of easy to differentiate. But then the red color, the what we call activation level or energy, or some people call it energy. It's like
yeah.
eustress,
Okay.
but it means both positive and negative stress. So physiologically, it's very challenging to tell sort of a positive and negative stress situation. Like, like if we are having a good discussion, we have to be very focused and engaged in this, but we might not be feeling any kind of negative stress, but that still elevates our heart rate. And yours and mine heart rate variability right now is probably a bit low and heart rate is a little bit high, whereas if we are having an intense argument with somebody that's causing a lot of frustration and pressure, it still causes a similar physiological reaction.
Yeah.
So the
So
red
is that the
color in itself
perception?
doesn't tell if a person is
Okay.
negatively or positively stressed, but
Is that
typically the recovery is that kind of tells the story. So
okay?
in general, we see that people are able to recover from a positive stress. So when the situation is over and they take a break or they go to sleep or they rest, their nervous system is able to switch very easily. Whereas if a person is in this kind of very negative, ongoing chronic stress situation, too much pressure, that kind of stress kind of lingers on. And that's the other graphic that you'll later see
Yep.
on the
Yep.
video. When you see only red, you see the whole day of that person is nothing but high red bars. And even when the person goes to sleep, that sympathetic nervous system, that stress reaction is still active.
Still
And
on.
that's the
Yes.
kind of harmful stress that then starts to wear out our resilience and resources.
Okay. So first beat is able to interpret the high red states by virtue of how quickly or how easily the body recovers after these states.
Yeah, but
Right?
also understanding the context. That's why,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example, during the measurement, people keep a journal, so they might write that, they went to a theater, or
Yes.
they had a positive workshop or something like that. So being able to see what they were doing, they can interpret the
So it's
context.
contextual. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. And
yeah,
it's often, as you alluded to, we're having an interesting discussion, but my HRV at the moment might be lower and resting heart rate a little bit higher, but actually that's a positive. Well, my perception would be that it's a positive stimulus. So it's interesting, exciting, and yeah, something that's to be enjoyed. Yet a stressful, intense work situation would you alluded to would be perceived very differently, but the red stress scores may be similar, but how the body reacts afterwards, you may be able to identify that.
yeah, yeah.
Is that a fair representation?
That's a fair representation, but also I would say that, like, if you compare the two graphs that we were looking at, you can see that the one graph that has a good balance,
Yep.
the red bars are, they are sometimes a bit higher, but then they're also a lot lower. So the level of stress is modulating during the day a lot, whereas the other example, the red bars are just sort of systematically and consistently very, very high all day. So that typically
Yep.
means some kind of a pressure situation, and negative stress where the
Okay. So
heart rate
they're
is
sort of
just constantly elevated.
on on the whole time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Switched on the whole time and not able to switch off.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, in terms of um, recovery and allowing people to recover after these stresses, is there a difference between how males and females can react to situations as a generalization, I suppose?
There is, yeah. I mean, I would say that the individual differences between people are bigger on
Yeah.
average than the differences between men and women as a category. But when we just last year, we did some really, our data analysts dug into the larger database and compared men and women. And it was pretty easy to see that women, I mean, I'm sad to say this, but women, have more physiological stress reactions, whether we look at 24-hour periods,
Okay.
sleep periods, or work periods, and they have less of that physiological recovery, that green color, that
Okay.
parasympathetic dominance. And this is even if also our data shows that women follow better habits. We women, we
Really?
tend to go to bed earlier, and we tend to follow a more regular sleep rhythm, but still our recovery ability is not quite as good as for men. And I wrote a blog about this last year, and I was kind of speculating because we don't
Yeah.
know for a
Yeah.
fact
Yeah.
what the reasons are, but I'm guessing there is some personality differences that I think it's probably fair to say that on average, more women have a tendency to kind of worry and ruminate and try to get it all done instead of just say in the evening that, okay, it's okay to switch off now, and I don't have to clean the house, or I don't have to finish every chore. Whereas maybe it's slightly easier. I mean, this is
A generalization,
stereotypical,
but
but
yeah.
still,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe it's slightly easier for the man to sit on the couch and just figure that today is done, and
You're not
tomorrow is ahead.
you're not stereotyping men but at all there, are you? Um, could an aspect of that be down to our way of living and our sort of, I'm in London. London is a rat race. It's busy, it's intense. Could that be at all geography based in that there's
Yeah,
some type of difference, personality difference, or physiological difference between males and females? I mean, we know there is, just generally anyway. But in busier cities, states, our Western lifestyle doesn't. promote recovery.
That's a really good point. I really hope we get to do that kind of big data analysis in the future.
Yeah,
We haven't really done that kind of comparisons between sort of city environments and country environments. So we only have sort of case evidence about that,
yeah,
but not bigger data. But I would absolutely expect there to be, some
yes,
kind of
some
differences like
correlation.
that.
Yeah, interesting.
And of course, with women, I would have to add that hormonal factors quite
Yes,
likely are also behind those differences that I mentioned earlier. That our measurements, since they are done a snapshot here and there, in general, we don't know what stage of a woman's hormonal cycle the measurement might
yeah,
have been
okay,
done. And some women might have very different reactions, for example, during the ovulation phase or right before their period starts. So that definitely can be another factor behind
yeah, okay.
behind
And
the
that's fascinating
poor.
because we treat a lot of sort of postmenopausal females, and certainly we see marked physiological changes within the body and how the tendons respond and how their bodies respond to load, and by virtue of that sort of recovery. So I imagine age profiles probably show a difference as well in terms of as you get older, are we able to recover less well?
Yeah, sadly, that is true also that the data shows that even as we get older, we follow slightly better routines. So as we
Yeah,
get older, we tend to go to bed a bit earlier and maybe have a more regular sleep rhythm. But clearly, the data shows that the percent of people out of sort of the larger database that has poor recovery result is it's significantly higher in the when we look at people in their 50s and early 60s, for example, compared to people in their 20s and 30s. So it seems like when you are in your 20s and 30s, you are sort of able to get away with
you
bad
can
habits
burn,
better than when you get
handle both
older.
ends a little bit more. I mean, you know, I comment on that with all my friends, and we can't sort of quite cope with the demands that we place on our bodies that we used to. We still think we're
Yeah,
25, but actually, you know, I don't go out and party these days, but going out and socializing and then getting to bed late and then trying to get up and work and perform is much harder
yeah.
now than what it used to be.
And but an important caveat to that also is that even if on average we see that young people are able to recover better and get better physiological recovery results, we also see a lot of signs of built up stress and overload and even burnout in people who are quite young. So it's
Yeah.
young
Okay.
people aren't by any means immune to that, even if on average their body's capacity to sort of handle those kind of loads is a little bit better.
Interesting. So is that, do you think, and this is perhaps speculating, but do you think that is, what comes with age also? You get a lot of maturity, you're able to reflect and see situations perhaps differently to how you would in the past, and that probably naturally builds a degree of resilience in people, and perhaps some of the time that's what people who are younger, a lot of my team are younger. I feel like I'm the old man in my team, but I'm only still in my late 40s. But whereby perhaps a degree of resilience, you've seen a lot more, you've experienced a lot more, and actually you probably tend to worry less about some of these work, home, social situations that perhaps add layers of stress to things.
Yeah, I would say that it doesn't happen to everyone or automatically, but probably we do gain some level of sort of wisdom and understanding of our bodies and our limitations. And, like you mentioned, the drinking, that I would say most people that I talk to who are in their late 40s or in their 50s have already, without any kind of data, realized that if they go out for a few large beers after work, that they are really suffering the next day. So
Yeah,
most people kind of come to understand that, and they start taking a bit better care of themselves, whereas when you're young you are kind of still trying to conquer the world and do
yeah,
it all, and you are you got your first career going and maybe starting a family and all those things that add quite a bit to your life. So there
yeah,
is definitely a lot going on at that point.
yeah, yeah. And different phases of people's lives are more or less stressful, depending on what's going on with their.
Yeah.
You just touched on an interesting point regarding alcohol. And now I know, you know, I haven't had a drink. I've sort of stopped drinking over the last year. But when I used to have a drink, I could probably have one drink, and it wouldn't really, a glass of wine or a beer. It probably wouldn't really hit my recovery, or my HRV wasn't altered. But any more than that, and my recovery's terrible. And looking at your HRV data and looking at your sleep quality, and alcohol is one thing that really does not aid performance.
Yeah, nor help sleep. I mean, people might
Yes.
think that I'm just going to have a nightcap to help me relax or something like that after a stressful day. But yeah, it's definitely not a sleep boosting
Yeah.
medication at all. I would say alcohol is probably the single most common thing people have learned from whatever kind of wearable they are using. And I've heard that from so many people, whether they're using a Whoop or Aura or Garmin or Apple Watch, that they're sort of shocked to see how much alcohol affects their recovery. And I would say that that's an area where people probably have actually learned to make smarter decisions based on that,
Yeah.
because it's kind of dramatic to see your normal good average scores just taking such a dive after you have a few drinks. So it has had a fairly dramatic effect on at least the way people think about having drinks, maybe saving them for a
Yes.
special occasion or for
Yeah.
the weekend, and not having a drink on work night or things like that.
Yeah, definitely, I'd agree. I think there seems to be a push among society for, there's probably more people who are abstaining and not drinking as much. And the UK is quite a drinking culture. I come from Australia, and it's a pretty big drinking culture there. So yeah, it's interesting that we're seeing that little shift. And
Yeah.
whether wearables have been a small part in that, I don't know, but certainly it alcohol massively impacts your recovery. So when when first people are looking at some of the big data and some of the trends around recovery and exercise, what are you seeing? Because we generally, the perception is that the fitter you are, the the better you'll be able to recover. Is that the fitter in cardiovascular fitness or strength fitness or both? And or do we have that information? But how does First Beat, when they're looking at some of these big data groups, um, find that information?
Yeah, that's probably the most consistent finding over the last almost 20 years that we've been seeing, is that in general it is like you sort of speculated that people in better fitness, they do have a better capacity to recover. So like the graph shows that the lower the fitness is, the less of this kind of physiological recovery they have. And then as people, the people who are in better fitness groups, they have more of the physiological recovery. And that trend
Okay.
applies to whether we look at 24-hour periods, so sort of day and night. If you look at work time only, so like how people are able to recover during their work day, and if you look at sleep time only. So it definitely seems like good aerobic, and this is mainly cardiovascular aerobic
Okay, so
fitness.
this is cardiovascular
Yeah,
fitness. Yeah,
yeah.
got
So
with it.
they do have, in a way, their body has the capacity to handle stress and then switch off and start recovering. Whereas if the fitness is very low, the daily life takes so much out of you. Just
Yes.
walking up the stairs or going from place to place gets your heart rate up, and it's like life is exercise for you. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yep.
not good, because it means that you're really using your resources just to get through your daily life, and then it's harder to recover after that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a definite trend that you're seeing with some of the big data groups. And when you're looking, and I think the graph that we've shown here, you're talking about sort of data sets of around 100,000 people, aren't you?
Yeah, the I think the when we looked at the age trend, and that was 100,000 measurements between the years of 2020 and 2024.
Okay.
The latest, the fitness trend that we are showing, that has 40,000 measurements between 2020 and 2024. That
Okay.
includes measurements that have where we know the person's fitness level. So they've done a fitness level walk as part of their measurement. So we are able to know what their aerobic fitness is, and then
Yep.
compare that to their
And that's
recovery
giving
scores.
you a rough approximation of their VO2 max, and
Yes.
that's what you're basing the fitness marker on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Do you think that, and I'm just thinking out loud here. Do you think that people who do less cardio but do a lot of strength work, they probably have a different type of fitness? They're perhaps stronger. They're probably better muscle health, bone health. Do you think, and they will be boosting their cardiovascular fitness, but perhaps not as intensely? Do you think potentially that you'd still see a similar trend in that cohort, or that's probably harder to assess?
It's harder to assess, and I'm speculating a little bit, but I would guess that anybody who has a regular exercise habit, they are building their autonomic nervous system in a positive way. The effect of aerobic exercise is going to have a more significant effect on heart rate variability, which is one of the key markers of the sort of the stress and recovery what we analyze. So the difference might not be as big, but as we know, any kind of exercise is good for your physical
Exactly.
health and your
That's
mental health. And so I think it's going to build a more balanced lifestyle, and that's going to boost recovery no matter what kind of exercise it is.
yeah. Okay. It's interesting. So, looking at recovery tools, um, in terms of helping people to recover post stress, post exercise, post life, um, what are some of the biggest tools and the best ways of people to recover? Now, we talk a lot about sleep, and I've read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and that's probably the best recovery tool. But there's lots of other things out there: massage and ice baths and saunas. And where does your data suggest that optimizing recovery? What are the trends that you're seeing?
Well, I would say that in a way you can't even really compare those kind of recovery tools and sleep, because sleep is clearly that is clearly the foundation that none of those other tricks are going to help us a whole lot if we are not paying attention to our sleep. So I'd say to absolutely start with sufficient amount of sleep and doing all you can to make sure that your sleep quality is as good as possible. But that said, we often say that good sleep is built during the day. And that's
Mm.
where I think any kind of recovery tools really help, because it helps us sort of moderate the stress that we have in our lives. So whether it's taking a sauna in the evening, or having an ice bath to help you recover from a hard workout, or practicing a good breathing exercise, which is that's getting a lot of press today, different kind of
Yep.
breath work and breath exercises that can boost the autonomic nervous system, the vagal system,
Yes.
the recovery nervous system, and that can increase your heart rate variability, as can sauna and as can massage. So I think all those things, whatever works for you and fits into your lifestyle, but it helps bring those stress levels down at times. And obviously, for those who are exercising a lot, those can really help that recovery from the exercise. I mean, at
Yes.
muscle level,
Yes.
and
Muscle.
preventing
Yes.
soreness and those kind of things.
Yep.
And all of that will kind of help together to then prepare you for that good
Prepare your
quality
body
sleep
for
that you
good
need.
sleep. Yeah, which is clearly the most critical thing you can do. I think nutrition has a part to play. We haven't touched on that. Um, Optimizing your nutrition and your macronutrients, but yeah, sleep is clearly the key factor. And I suppose being in Finland, you must have saunas and some cold plunges, and there's lots of evidence that putting that little bit of stress on the system, good stress on the system, helps to stimulate, a healing response almost from the body. And that's what, I believe, and that's probably another discussion, but saunas do. So that's something that you practice ever?
Yeah, actually, I just recently made a LinkedIn post about in Finland we say sauna, but I'll say
Sauna.
sauna now, so it sounds familiar. But that in my post I mentioned that there is over 3 million saunas in Finland, and there is only 5.5 million people. So that's a lot of
That's an
saunas
impressive
per
number. That's
per
an impressive
populace.
number. Yeah.
And for us it's definitely like a place of mental and physical recovery, and there
Yeah.
is actually some very powerful longitudinal medical studies that show that people who take regularly a sauna, they it has positive heart effects,
Yeah,
positive effects on the
it's good.
cardiovascular
Good.
health.
Yeah, it massively reduces your cardiovascular risk.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
from,
So
from,
that's a
from
really sort of a powerful clinical finding, but on a more day-to-day basis, it can acutely when you are in the sauna and you are getting hot, your heart rate is going to be up, but then with
yes,
slight delay, that can really boost that parasympathetic activation and can boost your heart rate variability and improve your sleep quality also. And kind of same with ice baths too. We do that in the winter time, and while you are in the cold water or taking an ice bath, your heart rate is probably going to be a bit high, but then there can be a
definitely
very
mine is
strong,
when I do it. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah, me too.
But but yes, afterwards you get this nice activation of the system, and okay, some endorphins as well, and but then it's how the system responds to that stimulus, and it can lead to really positive changes afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So what are moving on from sleep a little bit, but what are some of, and you talk about this, and I know you got another podcast or a lecture coming out about burnout soon, but and we might miss it by this when this gets aired. But what are some of the physiological signs that you can identify um, when someone might be entering that stressful period or going through that stressful period to lead to a burnout? And we're probably talking, more our corporate athletes or our office athletes here, who, really, and when you compare a professional athlete and a corporate athlete and a high achieving person, they're very similar in their approaches and what they have to achieve and how they have to function. So, what are you seeing in some of the data and some of the trends?
Yeah, it's a challenging area, and if it wasn't as challenging, then we could probably have better tools to start preventing, this
Yeah,
this epidemic of burnout going around, all around the world. But there is definitely some signs that a person can track, like their resting heart rate, for example. If you start systematically seeing that your resting heart rate is increasing, even if you're following a sort of the same lifestyle habits, if you
yeah,
start seeing that your heart rate variability is dropping, you have a certain baseline level that normally is, and you start seeing that that's getting less and less during sleep.
yeah,
If you're monitoring your stress or your recovery or your sleep metrics and they start taking a clear trend down, obviously those are worrisome signs. But I think the problem is, especially with athletes or corporate athletes or people who are really fit, is that the physiological system is so strong and robust that that can stay very strong for a long time, even if
yeah,
mentally you are already really struggling with the excess load and having too much going on. So simply sort of relying on the physiological metrics, you might end up waiting way too long. So you
yes,
also need to constantly kind of monitor your psychological markers. That are you is your mood changing, or are you constantly fatigued even if you are sleeping more than you are used to sleeping, or is your cognitive functioning not, are you able to concentrate or focus? So it's kind of a interplay between those two sides that we
yeah.
have to be really aware of.
That's a really good point because I think a lot of athletes and even perhaps in some corporate fields, just simply asking someone, so how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Are you feeling ready to train? Are you happy? And if those simple questions, I think there's a couple of simple three questions and quite detailed sort of that questionnaires that have been clinically validated that are relatively simple to actually demonstrate that actually people perhaps need to row things back or pull back because they could be heading down a pathway of being sort of burnt out, if you like,
Yeah,
and marrying that up with the physiological system because from my perception as a clinician, the the body's amazingly good at adapting for a long period of time, but then it suddenly decompensates. It can suddenly fall off the edge of a cliff really quite quickly from an injury or the physiology of someone, or when we talk about REDS, relative energy deficit sort of syndrome in some athletes, um, because those physiological signs may not be there, but actually the psychology of that individual has probably started getting altered.
Yeah.
before we identify some of those markers.
Yeah, and whether a high performing athlete or sort of a high performing individual in the corporate world, we tend to ignore the signs because we are
Yes.
conditioned to kind of pushing and powering through and doing our best and sort of ignoring the signs because it's time to do it now.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big signs of people in burnout. They have a tendency to overdo it and aim for the perfect performance in whatever aspect of their life that they have.
So how can corporates or people in the general public who have busy lives, there might be mums, they might be dads, they're managing a family, but they've got a career. What strategies can they do? Is that about just ensuring that they have those balances in their daily routine? They do the little things that helps their sleep, and they're getting enough sleep within their cycle, so that their graph is not all red, and,
Hmm.
and that there's an equal balance between red and green in terms of how First Pete look at it.
Yeah, I think some kind of data really can help because, like what we talked about before, that we can become so sort of used to and accustomed to that feeling of stress that we no longer notice that. So I do believe that data can help sort of open our eyes that, okay, what's
Yeah,
going on now? Why, how come my metrics are
a little bit.
systematically so
Yeah,
different? And especially if you're following a trend. But even without any kind of data, we can, like you said, sort of focus on the key ingredients of a good lifestyle, make sure we get enough sleep, make sure we get some kind of exercise on a regular basis, make sure we manage our stress in a sustainable way, and then do a check-in with ourselves periodically to see that, how am I feeling,
yes,
asking ourselves or our close ones those questions, and seeing if something is changing there.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. You you just touched on it there with the data, and we haven't definitely spoken about it, but from my perception, a lot of what we're trying to look for in these physiological states is that we're trying to look for trends. I'm not particularly worried if my patients or athletes, but a lot of our patients that we track, um, to help them to optimize themselves. I'm not particularly worried if their HRV drops on one day and then it's back up the next day. What I'm looking for is trends of over multiple days or weeks here, and then comparing to a more chronic time frame, or chronic or a longer term time frame over a month. Is that what you're meaning when you're talking about trends?
Yeah, I think anybody who is using a wearable device has to kind of respect that for the first few weeks the device is just gathering information about you, and
Yep.
an individual snapshot, whether it's a first beat or any other kind of measurement, it's only going to kind of tell where you are at right now. But then if you are in a position to gather that kind of constant data with a wearable, even if your accuracy might not be great all the time, and you don't need to spend attention or spend a lot of time worrying about the exact minutes of REM sleep or deep sleep or things like that, if you start seeing that long-term trend dropping despite you doing the same thing, so that
That
clearly is, I think,
that
some kind of a
yeah,
warning sign.
yeah, that's where you need to sort of step in. Yeah.
Or certainly, I know several people who've sort of, when COVID was going around more, prominently than right now, many people said that their wearable clearly, they woke up to a horrible readiness score and whatever metrics it gives them in the morning, and that came before they sort of had the symptoms of
Yes.
COVID. And then within the
Yeah.
next 24 hours, they ended up finding out they had COVID. So it can be surprisingly accurate in those kind of things. If suddenly your temperature is up and your heart rate is up and your heart rate variability is down. So it can be a sign that you are about to get sick.
Yeah, very true. Good point. Because I think I had COVID once or twice, but 24 hours, I was just feeling a little bit unwell, and then I woke up the next morning, not feeling terrible, but I was like, okay, that's a very low red. From a relatively normal sleep and hadn't done anything. And so that's often can be a sign that someone is getting unwell, and,
Hmm.
and, and has a virus or something going on in the system. So yeah, that's a good point to flag up. So For people in corporates who are working long hours, how do they try to ensure that they're getting sufficient recovery? Aside from the sleep, is there anything else? Are there any other sort of signals that they need to be watching out for, or is it just okay those trends, or is it the psychology? How are they actually feeling?
Both. I mean, I think you have to be really tough dude, dude or dudette
Yeah,
to be able to push sort of at the maximum stress level all day and then expect to sleep well. So even if you prioritize your 8 hours of sleep and if you figure that that's all you need, but if your day is just nonstop stress, sooner or later it usually starts wearing out the body's sort of
yes,
battery
yep,
and your
yep, yep.
resilience. So I think that's really being talked about a lot right now, is how people could make their work rhythm a bit more sustainable by making sure that they are taking, you know,
Regular
uh,
breaks, or
little breaks, taking a lunch break away from the computer. Even if they're working remotely, they need to leave the station where they're normally working to go and have lunch, even if it's just 5 meters away in the kitchen.
yeah,
To kind of go to a different setting, go outside for 5 minutes to get some fresh air. So those kind of little breaks, in some ways they might seem kind of you know insignificant or not so important, but really if you think about energy level and stress level, that can have a dramatic effect on your ability to then perform cognitively well in the afternoon if you have
yeah,
given yourself a chance to take that break and sort of boost your energy.
yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that, and wrapping this up with some exercise, because exercise stimulates quite a lot of change within the system. And when we're exercising, I'm a keen cyclist. I strength train. I Pilates. I like to push my body as well. But there's lots of different types of training that you can do that help, that I feel help my body anyway. And so, we talk about sort of zone two, zone three cardiovascular training, but then there's also more intense training, which is going to stress your VO2 max system. Now, I know that if I've got a busy day, if I did a zone two or zone three training session, I feel energized. I feel like I've got a lift, a boost of energy. But if I do a more intense session, I'm knackered. And so when people are busy in busy states, or under stress, are there better types of exercise to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of like you already indicated, that when you do a high intensity session, it's good for our VO2 max and our fitness, but it is also a major stress on the body. And so,
Yeah,
if you already have a high stress load because of maybe heavy demands at work or heavy demands in your personal life, and your sort of overall, what I call load of life, so your overall stress load is very heavy,
yeah,
then adding high intensity exercise on top of that, that can just sort of cancel your ability to recover almost completely, because it
yeah.
brings those stress levels even higher, and you don't really get the benefits of the exercise, but even more so you're actually you're
Put more stress on the
putting
system.
more stress on the system, so you're not able to recover. So clearly studies and research shows quite strongly that light activity, like even lighter than zone 2, so some
Yeah,
very kind of like maintaining easy exercise, even for a person with burnout or some kind of a more serious diagnosed condition, light activity is still going to be good for them as long as the intensity is very low, because it has good mental health benefits and
yeah,
it's good
yeah.
for the muscles to get some movement. But in a
So
very
go for
stressful
a walk
situation,
or something like that, or just
exactly,
a
yeah,
gentle cycle or something like that.
go for a walk without even thinking about it as as exercise. You
Yes,
don't have to put on your
get some
workout
fresh air.
clothes. And
Exactly.
yeah, but I've told that to so many people in my coaching discussions, that people who have a lot going on in their lives, but who are very, very committed to their exercise routine, that why not just put your sort of harder exercise routine on a back burner for the next few weeks, or maybe
Yeah,
during this stage in your life, and just do something easy and maintaining, and then get back to it
yeah.
when the situation improves a little bit. But if you drop it completely, then it's really difficult to get back to it, and you kind of have to start back from square one. So I definitely encourage people to continue with some kind of light activity, but really keep the intensity low.
Yeah, I mean that's really useful advice for people because I think people, I tend to feel that I explain to people that life is a drain on the battery. Exercise is a drain on the battery, but a positive drain on the battery. And actually, you've only got a finite amount, and you've got to allow the battery to be recharged. And if you're constantly pushing both work, life, and exercise super hard, at some point the system just can't cope very well. And so you need that down period to allow yourself to push on and get fitter again at a later stage. But a lot of the time, you need to change your exercise focus during those super busy, intense periods because the intense stuff is just not helping people. And I think that
Yeah.
goes for weight loss as well, and lots of areas within how the body functions.
Yeah, like the well-known supercompensation principles that athletes follow, that in order to for an athlete to improve their performance, they have to supercompensate, meaning that they
Yeah,
have to have their training load and their recovery in good balance so that they're
yeah,
able to reach that next level of performance. And I often talk about supercompensation of life with regular people, meaning that just like you said, they have to have all those different pieces of their life in balance so
yeah,
that they can recover from that. Otherwise, something starts to break down. You get sick, or you get injured, or you get burned out, or various symptoms can
yeah.
come if that balance is way off.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what it is. I think in our busy Western society, getting that right balance, getting the balance that works, and actually what is balance for me is different from you and from everyone else inherently, because we all have physiological and psychological differences in terms of how we're dealing with stresses and how our bodies function.
That's it. I mean, that's what this would be simple if it was
Yeah,
just if you could just
a one
prescribe the
size fits
perfect
all.
balance. But
Yeah,
yeah, it is very very individual, and we have a very different threshold for stress and for handling stress, and that's why everyone has to find it out for themselves.
yeah, definitely. So if we're touching on, you know, optimizing people's health span and longevity a little bit more, and perhaps health span is a better word, I think, because what we mean by health span is actually making sure that the last 10 to 15 years of your life are very good, healthy years, rather than, okay, do we all want to live to 115? Well, I'm not sure at the moment, but I wouldn't mind. But is that actually possible? So optimizing people's health span, are there different ways of trying to train and put stress on the body that can help to do that? Like you touched on the saunas, and we've touched on different types of cardiovascular training, the high intensity and lower intensity trainings. What are you seeing in some of the data?
Well, I mean, I can't really, the data doesn't really show that, but I would say that there is quite a bit of research suggesting that that kind of zone two, lower intensity endurance training for purely health purposes,
Yeah,
longevity purposes, that is crucial for that kind of basic good
yeah,
cardiovascular health. That's the core kind of exercise that everyone should do some of that, and
yes,
then
yeah,
the higher intensity, that's more for performance oriented people who want to boost their VO2 max or who want to run a 10K at a faster time. Then you obviously need that higher
yeah,
intensity as well, but for purely health purposes I would probably go for more that lower intensity. But then again, of course, strength training for our sort of muscle health and our core health,
and bone health.
balance, the bone health. So it is important to do some kind of resistance training for health purposes as well.
Yeah. I mean, because that zone two training, that lower intensity training, that's great for brain health. It's great for your mitochondrial system, mitochondria. There's so many positive benefits, reducing cancer risk. But am I right in saying, we naturally lose um, about 8 to 10% every decade of VO2 max? That naturally diminishes over a period of time. So if someone's VO2 max now is higher, then theoretically they're going to drop lower as they age.
Yeah, I don't remember the percent, but there is a definite decline that's very well established. But we can like slow down the decline by
Yes,
taking care of our fitness. So we can definitely help so that we don't lose so much of our aerobic fitness as we get older if we
yeah,
are regularly active and we do endurance exercise. So there's a lot we can do, and I'd say particularly for people whose VO2 max is very very low already when they are, for example, in their 30s, if they are not exercising at all and their fitness is just very very low, which is, sadly the statistics are showing that that percent of the population is increasing, then with the natural decline, by the time they are 50, just the activities of daily living are going to be quite taxing
exactly.
for them. So it is
And
a
walking
health metric in that
stairs.
way too.
Yeah, and I think VO2 max is a very good proxy for your health span really, as well as grip strength.
Yeah.
Interestingly, and so we do talk about people just dipping into that higher intense cardiovascular exercise to help to stress their VO2 and make sure that we're keeping and trying to maintain that, if not stopping or slowing the decline if we can.
Yeah.
Because yeah, as you said, everyday function becomes harder when you're less fit.
Yeah.
So we've touched on this a little bit in terms of stress, mindset, and emotional well-being influence the recovery parameters. I think we sort of mentioned it when, okay, it's almost someone's perception of this discussion, for example, or the perception of a stressful situation. There's the wearables. Do they have any way of being able to have an impact on that information, or
Um, yeah, even if you can't measure it directly, there is so much evidence that sort of positive mindset, it reduces stress hormone levels, and it improves our outlook on life. And then when we look at physiological recovery, it's hard to recover if your mindset is negative and your stress levels are really high. And
yeah,
so, as an example, if a person starts worrying about everything going on in the evening, like in the couple of hours before bedtime, watch the world news, for example.
yeah,
That
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
surefire way to get
doom
you.
doom scrolling or anything.
Yeah, and it can get your mindset in such a bad place and get your stress levels up, and then you think that, okay, I'm gonna now just close my eyes and put my head on the pillow and start sleeping, but it doesn't switch off like automatically, so
Yeah,
it can take hours for the mind to sort of reel and recover from that. So I think there's a lot we can do by working on our mindset and trying to have that kind of a positive outlook on things, and do a bit of worrying when we have to do it, but then also learn to switch off and kind of
yeah.
leave it behind.
And perhaps change some of our habits. What's the point in doom scrolling at the end of the day when you're only activating your system?
Yeah.
Do you need to think about some nicer things to to do for yourself to help to optimize that recovery so that you can sleep in a better
Yeah.
have better quality sleep?
Yeah, the evening routine, sort of the hour before you go to bed, that's the most significant period all day where you can hopefully build that kind of routine that helps you kind of land into that zone of sleep. So
Yeah,
kind of gradually switch off your mind and your body and lights in the house, and on many different levels you can kind of boost that kind of routine that then helps your brain get tired.
yeah. Optimizing, I suppose, your sleep hygiene or readiness to to get yourself prepared for sleep.
Yeah.
So, do you think feedback from wearables can help nudge and improve people's habits so that they are learning to optimize themselves better and live in a better way to help to get better balance for their body?
I do. Even if I mean, I work for a tech company myself, and I've got my own Garmin on most of the time. But I always caution people that don't over rely on data and don't start living your life sort of by looking at the data and by looking at the numbers in the morning and then letting that determine how your day is going to go. But That said, for example, movement, I would say even just a simple activity monitor that keeps track of your steps,
Yep.
it can definitely open people's eyes to a really passive lifestyle, and it can help them build in that kind of healthy activity into their days, so that
Yeah.
if all they were to monitor was their step count, lots of people have found that that's a sustainable way for them to sort of remember to build that
To
activity.
manage a little. Yeah.
And that happened during the pandemic. That was very obvious to people when suddenly we couldn't go anywhere, we're in lockdown, and people were just horrified when they realized that their
Yeah.
step
They're only
count would be
getting.
like 400 at the end of the
Yeah. Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then we discussed on alcohol earlier. I'd say that's definitely an area that I think it's fairly powerful
Yep.
evidence that people have learned to build maybe a little bit healthier alcohol habits because they see what dramatic effect that has
Yeah.
on their recovery.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we coach people around their data because I think some of the problems with wearables are that people struggle to actually interpret their own data, and what does it mean, you know. And that's where we can coach people so that they can understand to make better choices and understand to try to shift some perhaps slightly negative habits or create some better habits to make them feel better, because
Yeah,
ultimately that's what we're wanting people to do.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's it's a key in many kind of wellness projects is to have that coach who can help put it in perspective. And for example, with the first beat data, we always it's not a wearable that is just given to the individual. It's always in combination
In
of some
conjunction
kind
with
of
the coach.
coaching. So somebody is going to help you interpret that
Yeah.
data in a meaningful way instead of just sort of look at the numbers and be more stressed after that, because it's not the human physiology is so complex that it's very difficult for any device to conclude how you are
Yeah.
dealing with your own life without putting some context and interpretation to it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, speaking of context and sort of looking forwards a little bit, because I'm aware that we probably need to wrap this up shortly, but do you have a vision of where AI and wearables may be a going down the line? You know, a first beat working on using AI in its tech, or how do you see this moving forwards over the next little period of time?
um I don't know that I'm the best predictor in the world, and I'm not any kind of expert in the area of AI, but I would say that used in the right meaningful way, wearable data can hugely help people sort of build the kind of habits and lifestyle that is reasonable and sustainable for them, and sort of personalize
Yeah,
the way we live our lives. Instead of try to give like a one size fits all prescription to everyone, it can help take into account the factors of your life and help us understand our bodies better, and help us understand what are the triggers that maybe make things not be so well, and help us
yeah,
sleep better or manage our stress better. So I do believe that data can have a powerful role in that, as long as we have the caution that we still always are going to learn to listen to ourselves
yes,
and how we
exactly.
are doing, and
Yeah,
let our sort of psychological feelings and our mood and those kind of things dictate how we are, what kind of decisions we are doing.
yeah. I think that's where my perspective in seeing where sort of AI, and we're working on a few products in the health space with AI, and the behavioral health aspects of AI is coming along leaps and bounds. And if we can use these tools in conjunction with some good data from wearables to help to optimize people further so that they're living better, I think that's only a great thing,
Yeah.
moving forwards, to help arm people with more information. But let's see where the next 5 or 10 years goes and where it takes us. But Tina, I have found that utterly fascinating. I've loved chatting to you. It's been super interesting to sort of deep dive into your work and some of First Beat's data. And I'm really thankful for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Really nice, enjoyable discussion, and hope the listeners enjoyed it as well. And you referred to one of our burnout webinars, so it will have been
Okay,
done by the time this comes out. But if you go to First Beat website, you can find recordings of our webinars. So there is an interesting one
perfect.
coming up on webinar. We've had some before. So, of course, you can find some information there.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, Tiina, thank you for your time, and we will be in touch soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Bye bye.
Thank you.